So while Iran is making trouble again in the Middle East, the president is at the White House officially brokering peace between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain, basically moving the power dynamics away from Iran and its proxies like the Palestinians and into the hands of more U.S.-friendly nations. And I believe you were at the White House today for that signing. I'd like to hear what happened.
Well, it was an incredible ceremony. There were hundreds of people there, members of Congress, members, I think probably Trump's entire cabinet was there. And an historic agreement was signed between the UAE and Bahrain. I'm sorry, Bahrain and Israel and the UAE, and all three countries, the US and these other countries, that normalizes relations between these Arab states and Israel. But the most important thing here, and it goes to what you said earlier, is that Trump has changed the dynamics of the Middle East peace process. Israel is no longer the enemy, Iran is. And we've worked closely by establishing a relationship of trust, not just with Israel, but with the Arab states, to make it clear to them that normalizing relations with Israel and uniting against the threat from Iran is in their best interest. That's how this deal came around.
Yeah, and definitely. This is a really big deal. In fact, the president's been nominated for 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. One, of course, for this peace deal here in the Middle East between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain, but also for his work in the Balkans with helping to get Serbia and Kosovo, on better terms. So with that, I believe it's been about 40 years. President Trump's the first U.S. president in about 40 years to not start any new wars or to get the U.S. into any new conflicts. I mean, that has to merit something. Do you see him winning? I know he was nominated again back in 2018 for his work with North Korea, and obviously he didn't get it. But do you think he will win this time around? Do you have any hope at all?
Well, I'm delighted when someone who actually deserves the Peace Prize is not. And I think there's no question that the president deserves the Peace Prize based on what he's accomplished, North Korea, in the Balkans, and the Middle East. But the sad fact is he will never get it because the Peace Prize is dominated by global elitists. And consider for a moment that they don't nominate any conservatives. John Paul II didn't get it. Mother Teresa didn't get it. Ronald Reagan didn't get it. And Kara, let's be real here. How could Mother Teresa not get the Nobel Peace Prize? Well, because she was Catholic, because she was conservative, and because she's religious. So I like the fact the president was recognized, but we all know that that group of leftists is never going to honor him with the award.
Yeah, sadly, you're correct. And also, we're seeing a lot of deals coming out of the Trump administration that gives me hope. We see a few years ago the total territorial defeat of ISIS. We see that President Trump, I believe it was last year, was able to kind of release some of the pressure between Syria and Turkey and their border dispute there. And now, of course, recently here we're talking about Israel and Serbia and all these peace deals. Is it just, and Iran, we, kind of put a stop to that at the beginning of this year when they were acting up by taking out Qasem Soleimani, taking him off the playing field, as President Trump put it. So with all these foreign policy wins, it's kind of like, where was the last administration? They made it seem like it was impossible to get, like it takes decades to get any of this done. And we're seeing so much get done in so little time. I know there's a lot of nuance here, obviously. Do you think there's a lot of coincidence that a lot of these things are happening together? Or would you say it's the leadership that's being shown by President Trump, his administration, people like Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and so forth?
It's peace through strength. Trump is seen as a strong president who will use force if necessary, but does not want to get the U.S. into unnecessary wars. The Obama administration in the Middle East was leading from behind. His policy in Asia for North Korea was called strategic patience. Our enemies were laughing at us during the Obama administration. They saw Obama as an extremely weak president who would never use military force. Remember all the red lines Obama drew that the Russians and all the Middle East countries that just ignored and walked over them and nothing happened. But with President Trump, our enemies cannot be sure when he will use military force. And that ambiguity, that uncertainty has been stabilizing because Trump is credible in their eyes, and they're worried if they cross him that there could be a very significant military response.
And speaking of stabilizing, the last administration we had Hillary Clinton acting as Secretary of State, and not very stabilizing, her work in Libya, for example. So I actually have a tweet here that I want to get your take on real fast from Hillary Clinton. I believe she posted it yesterday. And she says, quote, here, let me see. She says, quote, "We deserve a president who cares whether his fellow Americans live or die." And I think the timing of this tweet is pretty funny, but in not a good way, because this comes just days after we had 9/11. We recognized that day back in 2012. That was the day of the Benghazi attack, in which she was in command and 4 Americans died under her watch. And so what do you make of this tweet of hers?
Well, basically, it's just really strange that Hillary Clinton would say that right now with this historic peace deal. That even editorial writers for the Washington Post and the New York Times who hate President Trump, they've had to acknowledge this is a great achievement for our country. You may have heard Nancy Pelosi laughed it off as a distraction for other things that she thinks are hurting the president politically. This is good for the world. And it's a shame that Hillary Clinton is such a sore loser that she continues to tweet stuff like that.
So, talking about Hillary Clinton, if God forbid Joe Biden were to win in November, how likely would it be that he would pick people like Clinton or Susan Rice or anyone else from the Obama era cast of characters, if you will, to join him in his administration? And if so, what do you fear that would do to our foreign policy? Would that undo a lot of these gains that President Trump has fought for these past 4 years, which we've been speaking about tonight? What would be your concerns?
I'm very concerned. I think the cast of characters that Biden would choose would do a lot of damage to U.S. national security. I think Susan Rice will probably be nominated to be Secretary of State. I don't know who would be National Security Advisor. I don't know that he would bring Hillary Clinton into the administration or not. The thought of doing that really worries me. But I think there are people more radical and more dangerous than Susan Rice who would get us into very dangerous multilateral agreements. The Paris Climate Accord, I think, would be, and we'd get back into the Iran deal. When we do that, we will destroy the agreements that were celebrated today at the White House. I think it could be a very dangerous time for our country.